Market Musings podcast with Fairbairn and Russell. Welcome to the Market Musings podcast, where today we're welcoming our guest, the Chief Executive of Altona Rare Earths, Christian Taylor Wilkinson. Hi, Christian. How are you? Welcome to the Market Musings podcast.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on.
Good. It's good to talk to you. And of course, our usual regular Kenny is, of course, dwelling in the background as well. Kenny, how are you?
Yeah, all good. Great to have you on, Christian. I hope it's as sunny where you are as it is in Scotland at the moment. It's certainly been glorious over the weekend.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the sun, so I actually prefer the weather when it was English weather rather than this global warming stuff.
Yeah, maybe we should move to Scotland then. You'll get plenty of rain and cold up here, so you will. But no, it's been great this weekend anyway. Look at yourself, Mark. What's it like in Holland?
Oh, it's beautiful today. Yeah, it's been a lovely weekend and it's still warm today. Yeah, it's nice blue skies and it feels very European today.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. No, it's great to have you on, Christian. And what we like to do in these podcasts is we like to get the directors and the chief executives on, and we like to sort of strip them back and almost get a sort of potted history of what they've done, both in their career and education. And you can go back as you want. Your childhood, where you were brought up, who motivates you, and anything that we can just drop into the conversation. Because we believe that people invest in people when people make projects. So really, probably for the next 10, 15 minutes, it's your platform to tell us a bit about Christian Taylor Wilkinson and where he came from and his journey to Altona.
Look, as you know, guys, I ran a financial PR firm still do slightly for 12 years, and worked for other larger agencies for that back to 2001. So I spent most of my adult life pushing chief executives into the forefront with the belief that, as well as the fundamentals of a company, shareholders like to know the people who are running the company because they're obviously guiding the strategy. And if a total buffoon is running a company, you don't really want to be investing your money into it. So I'm fully on board with sharing a few insights into me, but I've had quite a varied stop-start career. I think trying to find what suits me, what suited my personality. I think this is probably, we could probably call this iteration number 4. I think, but yeah, we can go back as far as you wish to go, and I'm happy to tell you whatever I can.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I must admit, I'm probably in iteration 4 as well. And as Mark will tell you, I've got quite a colourful past as well. But I think it helps shapes the person if you've done a few different careers. And I've worked in a factory environment before, and it's a very much sink or swim environment, and you learn a lot about life. So you do when you're working in these sort of sectors. But no. Go back as far as you want, Christian. Where you were born, what it was like growing up, what you done in your spare time, and if you liked school or not, stuff like that. That's kind of things that people like to hear.
Fine. Well, look, I was born in Leeds, in Old Woodley, which is sort of the last road on the very northern edge of Leeds by Old Woodley Golf Course.
That's my neck of the woods. That is.
That is correct. Idyllic childhood, got everything I wanted, saved up for Christmas presents, and my parents still up there. They live in Harrogate now, which is where we moved. I went to school in Harrogate, which is one of those weird northern towns that think it's dead posh and thinks it's part of the south of England. And I probably won't be able to load back to Harrogate again. And everything was fine. The only sort of odd thing was when everyone started applying for universities in 1986, because we left school in 87. I didn't want to go to university. I thought it was pointless. I was bored of education, and my grand plan was to be making 10 times the amount of money that graduates would make after spending 3 years in some dismal northern university. So I applied for a job. I wanted to go work in banking. I wanted to be an investment banker. I knew that for a fact. But unfortunately, living in Leeds, where your father's a journalist and you'd have literally no connection or no idea of the city, I didn't know the difference between investment banks and clearing banks. So I applied to all the big 6 UK, high street banks, got a job offer for each one of them on, various management, school leaver, accelerated programs, and ended up in NatWest, where I spent 5 horrible years. But what it taught me was, and this, Mark, you'll know, was in Chapel Allerton in Leeds.
Yeah, I know.
So right next to Chapel Town, where there were lots of riots going on around the 80s as well. It's a large ethnic community, really colourful. It was great in the day-to-day side of things, but what it taught me was sitting at a desk from 9 till 5, you just need to, realize that work is to facilitate your life, I think is the best way to describe it, rather than work is your life. And some people obviously realize that they potentially had no other choice but to spend the rest of their life working in a tiny little office with 7 other people. I think that's what it was. The same 7 people every single day of your life, on lunch breaks and 15 minutes for a coffee break. And, the branch manager would be tapping his watch if you were a minute late back to your desk. So I don't think those sort of jobs exist anymore. But it taught me that was something I did not want to do. And it gave me great patience. And also I think it gave me great people skills as well, because my job was mainly to look after the investment side of things for our sort of more wealthy clients. And that was it. I think that was the first tranche of my working life. It's more about socializing in Harrogate, whilst having to go to work every day. Oh, and also the other thing as well, the thought about me being on 10 times the salary of all my friends when they left university. Not true at all. I think when I left NatWest in 92, I was probably still only on about £9,000 a year, and all my friends were leaving universities like Durham and Bristol on sort of £30,000-40,000 a year as graduate salaries. So that's when I sort of realised that I'd made a horrible error. So I applied to university and I went to university in 93.
Yeah, I must admit, Christian, my first job was as a trainee quantity surveyor, was in an office as well, and it was a bit like that. And some of the things that went on in that office and you had to put up with just wouldn't brush nowadays, but you just took it in the chin. And I think the time I came out of that office environment, I was, like I say, when I went into a factory environment, I was ready for anything these guys had to throw at me, because I had just sat and sort of taken it for the last 3 or 4 years. But you get wise. But no, it shapes a person. A country boy going to work in the middle of Glasgow and getting screamed at every day by lunatic directors and partners. And I never complained, because you don't know any different. You just bite your tongue and go on with it. But once you come out and you see that the whole world's not actually like this, it was a crazy environment. I certainly couldn't have been on working in there much longer. I eventually walked out because I'd just had enough. But good stuff. So you went to uni, and what was the course? What did you take?
I did a degree in archaeology and ancient history, and obviously people have laughed. Why do you not do? Because you still wanted to work in investment banking. Why do you not do economics or some sort of maths or business studies? And it was based on research. 2 things really. One, the people I'd spoken to. If I got a degree, what does it matter? And the main point of view was, get a degree from a good university and the subject doesn't necessarily matter. So I thought, well, what am I interested in? And somehow I was interested in ancient history and archaeology. And it sounded like quite a good laugh. It's like 5 hours a week or something. So that's what I did. I went to Manchester and spent 3 years there. I think I was bored after 2 years, realizing that that this degree could have been done easily in 2 years, but still, did some good field trips, spent a few weeks on Skye, scraping around in what turned out to be a Victorian farmer's sheep pen, but which our archaeological professor said was some sort of Iron Age fort complex, which is great in the snow and rain every day. So got my degree. On the way from Manchester, collected my girlfriend on the 24th of June 96 and drove to London into a flat that we'd rented or we'd sort of secured about 3 weeks before, and that was that. And let me tell you this: this is how little knowledge I had of how London works, and it's always been it is a prejudice. Most of the people that you work with in London are from London and have some sort of nepotism going on, especially if you're working in the city type areas. So when we arrived, the first thing we did was go knock on the door of all the recruitment consultancies. But I'm not talking about headhunters or search and select. I'm not talking about these. I'm talking about people like Reed.
Yeah.
And we were actually put into a room and we were sat like a typing exam. And I was sitting there going, hang on, I want to be Gordon Gekko. Why am I doing a typing exam? And it wasn't then I realized that we'd basically walked into because we had no other knowledge, we'd walked into a secretarial, temp agency sort of thing. So it took about, 2 or 3 months. I don't think we had any strings to pull. It was just sort of sheer determination and hard work to get a job. And the first job I got was at Kleinwort Benson in their back office. Stayed there for sort of 2 or 3 months, realizing that's not what I wanted. And sort of within 9 months, I worked at CSFB for 6 months and then Merrill Lynch for a while, then finally got a job at UBS just on the day that UBS merged with Swiss Bank, whatever it's called. And that was it. And then maybe 4 months later, got moved into corporate finance. And so that was the dream, basically. I'd finally reached the job I wanted. I was an investment banker at the time, Europe's largest investment bank, working on the Vodafone management deal, looking after Swisscom and Portugal Telecom and all the big European sort of tech telco companies. It was absolutely fantastic. But then within sort of 2 years I realized that every single person who works in investment banking is horrible. And it just didn't suit my personality at all. And so started looking for something else. This is around 2001, started looking for something else and just happened to stumble across financial public relations, had a few interviews and swapped careers again into financial PR, which I think was made for me.
Yeah, and you said that was that company called, is it Weber Shandwick? Was that?
Well, Weber Shandwick was the company that bought out the agency I moved to, which is called Square Mile, and it was a small agency, maybe 25, 30 people. A lot of the people who actually worked for Square Mile now run their own financial PR agencies. Josh Royston and Graham Herring, and a lot of other people were trained under the two proprietors, who were just absolutely awesome. Great atmosphere, great energy. We won lots of business. So much so that Weber Shandwick, which was owned by Interpublic Group, the largest PR agency in the world, chose Square Mile as their sort of London city operations. And, we became the city arm, the financial sort of PR facing arm of Weber Shandwick in London, which is a little bit corporate. It reminded me of investment banking again. I think I stayed in that sort of new iteration for 2 years before I did what I wanted to do, which was move back into a smaller agency. So I went to Tavistock, spent 2 or 3 years with Tavistock, and then flipped again to work with Lisa Peters and Lawrence Reed at Conduit, which was a mining resources specialist PR house, but they brought me in to sort of look after the technology side. And then another little PR firm afterwards, which has made me realize sort of in 2008, instead of sort of winning all these new accounts and letting the guys who own the PR companies make all the money, why do I not do this for myself? So in April 2009, set Leander PR up. And that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years until I was put on the board of Altona in January 2019.
Yeah, certainly. Like you've bit on myself, you've had a few different iterations to get where you want to be. Was it always a kind of sort of technology and media sort of telecom sector you kind of up until that point you'd focused on?
Not necessarily, because most telcos are large and the PR agencies I was working for were small. So we had a lot of fascinating technology companies along the way. I probably advised maybe 30 or 40 different companies, most of them who have failed at some point, run out of money or were taken out by competition, or who just decided to delist from AIM. And predominantly they were all AIM companies, mainly because, if you're on AIM for about 5 years and you don't deliver what you say you're going to deliver, then the market reacts poorly, whether from the brokers and the fund managers not giving any cash, or the shareholders, the private shareholders, just demonstrating their unhappiness by selling the shares. And as everyone knows, if your share price halves or more, which you can do in a day, it takes you sometimes a year or two to get it back to where it was. So inevitably it's the death knell. A lot of funky Chinese companies, Israeli companies, who all got the best technology but the worst corporate governance. I don't think they care two hoops about the UK stock market. They use it purely to raise money, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And everything else, it's down to the nomad to police. Feel sorry for nomads sometimes with the difficulties they have. Few mining companies, resources companies. A bit generous. I think under Leander PR, because I was trying to make some money, it was, you couldn't be, beggars can't be choosers, that sort of mentality. So I was looking at all sorts of companies. Anybody who would be interested in working with a one-man band setup, who wouldn't have the glamour of the office and the board meeting rooms and large expense budgets to be taken to the best restaurants and all that sort of stuff. I think they had to be comfortable working with just me, who sometimes can be quite, strong-willed, bloody-minded if I don't believe what they're saying. But some companies embraced it, and I think that's why I've got 3 clients still, and I've had them for 12 years. So even though I'm running Altona full time, what I've said to these clients is, if you want to change to find another PR company, I totally understand. I'm just happy to walk away. I'm doing this almost like as a favor now, because I've been advising you for so long, and they haven't asked to move on. I've also said I'm happy to recommend 2 or 3 different agencies who I know would suit you very well, but they're happy to continue with me. So that probably takes 2 or 3 hours a month or something. But it doesn't get into the way with Altona, which is obviously what I want to get across on this phone call.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that brings us up nicely then to Altona. So how did that come about, Christian?
Ooh. So I did the financial PR for Altona from October 2014. There were a couple of Chinese guys running the business at that time. They brought me in. I helped them bring in a new nomad, and I helped them bring in another non-exec director. And the company had these assets in Australia, these coal assets, which it owned since 2005. They brought in a joint venture partner, a Chinese joint venture partner who'd set aside 35 million Australian dollars to complete the exploration and start developing this underground coal gasification process in South Australia. And it was only then that the company realized that it needs a different license. It didn't need a sort of straightforward coal exploration license. It needed a petroleum license, because it was dealing with hydrocarbons. And weirdly, in Australia, even though the company owned the tenement and the exploration license, there was a different license sat on top of it. So there's multiple licenses across these areas. This is like, talking 2,500 square kilometers. So about 70% of the land was overlapped by this petroleum exploration license, which was owned by another company, which had gone into administration because they tried underground coal gasification and nearly blew up Queensland. And so they'd lost all the money and were sued. And out of receivership, an American company bought it, and Altona couldn't get the license off them. So I would say, as early as 2016, that deal was, that mining operation was dead, but it still sort of struggled on, as mining companies do, stringing shareholders along by, we'll get there, don't worry, we'll get there, we'll find a different plan for the asset. So I was removed from the financial PR in March 2018. Someone else, don't know who it was replaced me. And when was it, December 18, the Nomad resigned because they weren't going anywhere. They tried to get rid of the executive chair at the time, a guy called Qinfu Zhang. Shareholders got in touch with me saying, hey, look, I don't like what's happening here. Do you think we can keep Zhang in this spot? So I said, obviously, what I can do. And we sort of put together a group, like an activist shareholder group, went to the EGM to remove Mr. Zhang from the board, reversed the decision, and instead basically forced the other 5 directors to resign. If they hadn't resigned, then they would have been subject to their own sort of GM to have them removed. And that was that. So my reward, I'm sort of doing inverted, common with my fingers here. My reward was to be made a non-exec director to look after the UK corporate governance and the listing side of things. I think we had like 2 days before the AIM listing was going to be cancelled. So I had 2 days to decide what to do. And we chose to apply to list on Aquis, which we did. Just sort of crept under the finish line before the deadline and listed on Aquis. And that was it. So I think we spent 2019 getting rid of the Australian assets, getting rid of the Chinese eventually. I suggested to them that because they were paying themselves quite a lot of cash for doing little work, it would be better if they preserved the company's cash reserves and resigned and just stayed as shareholders. And we would try our best to reward them in the future, which they did, because I asked nicely rather than trying to get rid of them by a general meeting. And then beginning of 2020, we started looking at the rare earth sector. We were looking for a different opportunity. It had to be in mining because that's what our articles say we do. And people kept talking about rare earths and the opportunities and the fact that there was a great need in the world outside of China to find an alternative source. And we'd already been in Australia. I didn't want to go there again, and America's too big. So Africa seemed to be the starting point. And very quickly, we sort of assembled a team of people who knew what they were doing, and so we were introduced to a couple of companies that either had a license or had an asset that they wanted to get an investment partner in, which is Altona.
Okay. How come you went to the Aquis, Christian?
As opposed to what?
Well, you said you had a few days left, didn't you, on to decide what to do? Was it something that just allowed you to continue the listing in an easier manner?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think what Christian was saying, Mark, is you're probably going to be struck off AIM, so that was the only alternative.
Yeah, right. we were going to be, absolutely. We couldn't find a Nomad. I think that was clear that Altona had absolutely burnt its bridges. Don't forget, and don't forget this, that I've been working with every single AIM broker for the last 20 years, and so I would say horribly disappointed. I think that's a good way of describing it. The fact that when I was calling up people who I considered, if not friends, and certainly, good associates, to say, hey, look, this is a new Altona. And the answer was absolutely no. We were shown it 6 months ago when we heard that SP Angel might be resigning, Northland Capital, and we just can't take you on. And you also have to remember that the market cap of Altona had fallen from £8 million in October 17 to £400,000, £500,000 at December 18 when the Nomad resigned. So it was too small. It was too small to be on AIM. It was too small for a Nomad to take on. And it just had so much baggage of never delivering after 15 years of listing on AIM that it needed a reset. And I thought the reset would be put it onto Aquis, which no one really cares about. Sorry, Aquis, if you're listening. And they're doing a better job now. And when you have a fully formed company with an asset or two and some cash in the bank and a board of directors who are credible and a strategy, then maybe look at going back to the LSE, which is exactly the plan. Apart from we're not going back to AIM because it costs £500,000 plus to list on it. I think that another mining company on AIM is a bad idea. It's probably the most criticised stock market in the world. I think people, as much as anything, they look for companies who fail and then they can put the boot in. And Altona is still very early stage. We're still very much prospecting. We're still a high risk, and I'm not prepared for shareholders who are putting their their sometimes, let's say, life savings in, or certainly, large chunks of cash in, to a market where someone could get bored one day and start causing trouble on a bulletin board, sell half, whatever, £500 worth of shares, and you lose 40-50% of your market cap, and it starts a downward trend. So I wanted to go to a more responsible market, which was the LSE. I might be wrong in that assumption, but I know that AIM has some very specific media outlets dedicated to it. It has, chat rooms dedicated to it. And I think the LSE standard is still not quite there yet. It's almost like AIM was, I would think, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I know Pensana, for example, they're listed on standard. And I just think you get treated with more fairness rather than the arbitrary treatment that some companies do get. Obviously, some companies absolutely deserve being treated poorly because they treat their shareholders poorly, but that's not what Altona is. Altona to suffer by the stock market it's on when it's doing everything in its power to actually make a an operational difference and make a return for shareholders. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I guess the benefit of Aquis at the moment, just in general, as well, is that it's to coin a phrase, it's cheap as chips to run a business on as compared to AIM at the moment.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. The reason we started looking at this 7 months ago now to get off Aquis as soon as we had a viable business plan, because you can't raise cash. But we've raised £800,000 plus since December. So, yeah, I think it's to do with the fact that we're in rare earths. Yes, also we are, most of the members of the board are fairly well connected through other businesses to the London Stock Exchange. And no, we didn't go through the traditional broker route to do it, but still, people knowing that we were listed on Aquis and that the liquidity levels are very, very low, so therefore to sell at the asking price is a tough thing to do. We managed to raise enough money to put the strategy into place. We've got maybe £350,000 left in the bank. It will see us through easily until we list on standard. We're hoping to close one of these deals that we've announced, hopefully in the next 30 days. The contracts with the counterparty. If they don't have any comments, then we can get it signed quickly. And then the next step is to get drilling, basically, start the exploration program. And we've set aside, a couple of £100,000 or a couple of $100,000 for that for the first 6 months. And this will obviously bump into the fact that we'll hopefully list on standard in July, I'm going to say. We've sort of done a calculation, and if the FCA, who currently have our first draft of our prospectus, if the FCA aren't busy and they stick to the timetable as prescribed that they do, i.e. 10-day turnaround for the first draft, followed by 5 days, 5 days, 5 days. If we go through 4 iterations of comments before they're happy with it, we sort of get to about the 1st of July. So let's give them 3 weeks delay on that. We'll still hopefully be listing on the standard exchange before the end of July, which would be great because I've been telling shareholders that we'd have done this in April. That was my original guess. That's what I actually thought. It would take us about 3 months to do. We were going to start it in January. The issue was that we didn't have, we had to make a decision whether to go as a SPAC, which we've actually decided we have to go in the end, or as an asset. And initially I wanted to go with an asset, but we haven't got any assets yet. The main deal, or the first deal we're looking at, the Chambay rare earth project in Malawi, where we're acquiring 51%, they still haven't been granted the exploration license. It's pending approval still. And one of the terms of the agreement is that they need a license. So we can't, we can't acquire that company, which is basically just an empty shell with no license in it. So we had to make a decision, which took us, we didn't rush into it. We had to decide carefully over it. So that's one of the reasons why we delayed in doing this.
Before we start, do an overview of the company, Christian, I mean, rare earths, it's like a dark art, isn't it? Not everybody really knows about rare earths. So I wonder if you can maybe just take a minute.
Kenny, I certainly don't know anything about rare earths, so you're asking me that. apparently rare earths aren't rare. That's the first thing I was told by a very clever analyst. It's just finding them in economically sized parcels that makes it difficult. They're everywhere. If you're standing in your garden at the moment, like I am, you've probably got rare earths tucked away under your feet, but in such minute quantities that you're not going to make any money. So the trick is obviously finding them in big chunky ore bodies, which China did. So they're using everything, and this is one of the slight frustrations. But we have to be patient. Every human being on the planet probably has on their persons or within their house a number of technical gadgets, devices that will contain some form of the, one or two or more of the 17 rare earth elements that are listed on the periodic table. From mobile phones, which is the obvious one. If you've got an electric vehicle, it's going to be powering your steering and all that sort of stuff in it. You've got on your drive through the coast and you see all those wind turbines, then the magnets used to power those wind turbines, like electric vehicles are using things like praseodymium and neodymium and a few other the elements. So they're incredibly valuable. And it's interesting that occasionally in the papers, and I'm not talking about the business section, I'm talking about the normal pages of the newspapers like the Times. So it's still the broadsheets. They're now actually starting talking about rare earth. So you could ask 100 people just randomly on the street and they wouldn't have a clue what the words rare earth means. They have no idea. But I think within 5 or 10 years, unless a cooler name comes for it, critical metals or whatever, I think people will start realizing the need for it. And luckily, and I think it is the American government primarily who's driving this, they're used in lots of military applications, like the guidance systems for missiles. Some random stats which change a lot. Like a nuclear submarine has about 9 tons of rare earths. A F-35, is that the Raptor? I can't remember which one it is. The Eurofighter or whatever it is, has something like, I don't know, a ton of it in. So we're talking large amounts. We're not just talking about a few grams here and there. We're talking about proper, sizable chunks of it.
Yeah.
And if China ever got a bit arsy towards America, which sometimes they do, they could just say, because they basically have every single processing facility for these metals. They just say, no, you're not having them, or we need them because we're building a few more missiles, or so the government in the UK announced the other day that by 2045 every car will be electric, or every new car sold will be electric. That's 24 years away. We don't have enough rare earths to make that happen currently. And let's say China implement a similar sort of plan, they will need all the rare earths because they're processing them. They'll just need them for themselves. So there'll be none available for the Europe, the US, whatever, the rest of the world. So we need an alternative thought. So Pensana's got the right idea. They're building this new plant, this processing plant down in Saltend, or up in Saltend, in Tyne Wear, wherever it is, northeast of England. And I might be wrong, but I think that's probably the only European alternative for a processing plant for this. And then we need companies like Altona to go and find them to provide a supply to these plants. Because at the moment, if we found a supply and there was no alternative, we'd have to send them off to China. And we wouldn't send them off to China. We wouldn't still have ownership of them. We'd be selling them to the processing plants in China. And then they can do what they want with them, keep them in China, use them for themselves. They wouldn't necessarily then find their way back to Altona, so we could pass them on to our lovely technology partners in the UK or give them to the British government. So that's the alternative. That's the imperative, that some company finds a supply, but at the same time has a processing facility outside of China. So the rare earths are kept for non-Chinese use. An example, the Chinese squeezed them, I think 2 years ago, and the price went up 40%.
Yeah.
So it's little tweaks like that, but it makes a big difference. And if you're I'm going to buy myself an electric vehicle, I really fancy it. I've been waiting for 5 years. I think the prices are right. You go to the garage and all of a sudden they're up 40% because there's a shortage of rare earths. Then you're not going to buy it, are you? So therefore, UK government's plan is just scuppered immediately. So they do have an importance. I think probably less than 0.001% of the population of the UK realise the importance of them. Our job possibly is to start the education process. I'm always slightly wary coming from a financial PR background. If to promoting a company so potential investors can see the relevance or the importance or the clarity of an investment value in the company at share price versus pushing a company to the consumer, the corporate side, so people can go out and buy your products. But as we're not selling any products, it's going to be hard to market that, isn't it? So these are sort of thoughts that are going through my head. Very early stage because we don't have an asset yet, but I think at some point we're going to have to start becoming one of the ambassadors for rare earths in Europe.
Yeah, and talking of assets, I mean, you do have 3 potential assets, obviously, all work in progress, as you kind of touched on earlier on. Can you just give us a quick sort of overview of the 3 assets that you're working on just now, Christian?
Yep. In no particular order.
Yep, that's fine.
Mozambique first, Monte Moambe. We sent off a final draft of a contract. We're just waiting for their comments on it. But as the contract is based upon, I've just been given a nice orange juice. As the contract's based on, the MOU, which we signed on the 24th of March, we're hoping that there won't be many changes to make. So fingers crossed. And this obviously hasn't been announced by RNS or anything like that. So but I don't think I'm doing anything price sensitive. I hope that we'll be able to get this contract signed soon. There's no problems, and that will give us our first asset. But this is a farming agreement, so our first tranche is only 1%. And then we have to do an initial exploration program, which we hope to complete before the end of the year. That will give us a further 19%, taking us to 20%. So it's going to be a couple of years before we get to 51%, because that's at the end of phase 2, where we obviously have control of it. But we're forming a joint venture company in Mozambique called the Monte Moambe Mining Company, and we will have I think the majority of the board, 2 board directors to their one. These guys are very much silent partners. They just happen to own an asset. They're looking for, I said, investments. They want to sit back and hopefully within sort of 5 or 10 years have something that they can either exit for a high price or be with us if we choose to sell it. Put many millions of pounds in the pocket. So that's that. It's good. It's a carbonatite project. So that means it's the rare earths are sitting in rock. It's going to be long term. It's going to be expensive to get to. We're just planning the drilling program now. How many holes, which technique, RC or diamond. And we said we set about 100,000, 200,000 aside to make sure our partner's comfortable and we're happy and we get the job done. And
there's a lot of good, just before you move on, Christian, I mean, there's a lot of good historical data with that project anyway. I mean, it has got some really tasty drill results.
Yeah, sorry, you're absolutely right. Thank you. You should be our PR consultant. No, you're absolutely right. Sometimes I get focused on the detail and forget actually what I'm talking about. So an Australian listed company called Globe Metals back in 2012 looking for fluorite, fluorspar, drilled however many holes, can't remember how many holes, maybe 11, 15 holes. And they had them analysed, and rare earths were present in something like 5 of them. And only 5% of this sort of old volcanic crater was explored. So we've got a lot to explore. But we're talking about the total rare earth oxide, which is sort of the average measurement for the industry, at various intersects from sort of like 10 meters to 49 meters, was, I think the average is about 2.54 trio, which is above average. So, again, I haven't checked my facts here, but, along the lines of Makango's project, the Songwe project in Malawi, that's another carbonatite project. Hey, and look, their market cap's £30 million. Ours is 1.8. So we just need to get the ball rolling, I think.
Yeah.
So what we did say when we set out, because rewinding the clock to me taking over this role and talking to sort of Altona's historic shareholders, I'm talking about the activist group we got together with. They were very happy with my appointment as long as I did certain things. One of them was to find an asset, if we were going to stay in mining, which we could get to revenue within, let's say, 3 years. Because thinking about Altona historically, they had the Akaringa tenements for 15 years. and not one penny of revenue was ever generated. So when we were looking at rare earths, what attracted me first of all was the fact that in Africa, sort of fairly recently, ionic clay deposits or rare earth deposits in ionic clays, which are soil clay beds, had been found. This is the predominance in China as well, again, which is China's so far ahead of the field. They didn't have to drill through hundreds of meters of rock. They just had to open pit mine areas of soil and clay. And also the processing side of things is far easier, because if you think about it, if you've got some soil in your hand, you just need to wash it. Mild chemical solution, but basically wash it to get out the rare earths. Rather, if you've got a rock in your hand, you're going to have to crush it and then mill it to a certain size, and you're going to have to use fairly strong acids to leach out the rare earths before they're washed and sent off to be processed. So it's a lot cheaper. And I thought, yes, this would be something I think those long-suffering, patient shareholders of Altona would be interested in. So that brings us on to the asset in Malawi, the Chambay project. 2nd of June today, I think, isn't it? The reason why I say that, we signed the MOU on the 2nd of June last year, so it's been a year. Two main conditions lead to the signing of the agreement. One is they've got to have the license, the exploration license, which is still pending, as I've said. And secondly, we have to be listed on the LSE. So one condition from us, one condition from them. And we're still at that point, still negotiating. There's an MOU in place. When we get closer to our listing date, we'll then, find out what their plans are, or what the government's plans are for issuing this company with this license. I don't think it can be removed from them. I think in Malawi, if you're granted a license pending approval, it cannot be removed from you unless you decide you don't want it anymore. So they're in the queue and they can't be taken out of the queue. I suppose it doesn't stop someone with deeper pockets in Altona coming along and, schmoozing them a little bit and taking them out for a fancy steak supper and dangling cash in front of their eyes. But as yet, that's not happened. We're still there. And we just need to sort out our listing and then sit down at the table with them and find a good price to acquire this asset. And that's ionic clay, very little data. There's a report, which is actually, you can find it online. It's on the internet. It's done by Springstone back in 2009, I think it was, with their partner JOGMEC, a Japanese state exploration company. And the report says that the site for rare earths is not economically viable. However, our partner, Akaswiri Minerals, who we're acquiring, they worked later on in 2018, 2019 seasons with JOGMEC, and there's supposed to be another report on this project that hasn't been published. And the reason why it wasn't published was twofold. One, they thought if they published it, the Chinese mining companies might get hold of it and therefore might try to oust them. And secondly, the Malawian government took the license off them because they'd had it for 10 years. They hadn't done anything, so they took it off them, and therefore they sort of threw the toys out the pram, and they refused to give this exploration report to the government. So we haven't seen it. So apparently it's good. Our partner was one of the geologists working on the project with JOGMEC, or working with the key geologist who wrote this report, SNI 43101, and we have his word to go on that there are rare earths at Chambay in suitable quantities. But the capex and the opex will be very low at this place. It's a very finite basin at the top of the hill, which is easily accessible.
Yeah, it's in a good location as well, isn't it? It's next to
Songwe.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it's I think it's about 5 kilometers away. So there's road network and the rail network. It's actually quite close to the border to Mozambique, and this Monte Moambe is just across the border in Mozambique. So, for me going out there to visit, I could visit both projects within a couple of days of each other. It's like a 7-hour drive between the two across the border. And don't forget, these countries have had European mining taking place there for at least a century, maybe 2 centuries. So they're used to how it works. The infrastructure's there. We're not the first people to do this. We're not finding something brand new in the middle of nowhere where we have to build a road and put in electricity and water and build, houses for people. It's all there. The infrastructure's there. Or someone like at Chambay, the cost to sort of finish a spur road and put some housing or some huts up there is not going to be too expensive. It's all budgeted for. Then the final project is the one in Uganda. We have until the 30th of June to decide whether to proceed on that one or not. That's another ionic clay project. It sits just south of an Australian listed ionic clay rare earth mining company called IXR, Ionic Rare Earths Limited. We're just waiting for some samples to come back. We took some soil samples because it's a greenfield site. No drilling, no exploration has been done there. We've taken some samples. We're getting them analysed, and once we get the result of that, we'll make a decision whether or not to proceed. But at the same time, we have just set aside a budget to further our exploration into 4 countries in Africa, so that Central African region, to look at those projects we know are up for sale or might be up for sale that have rare earths, but also to maybe find some sort of pure prospecting areas which have no ownership. So we can probably stake the first ownership claim, which will be a first for us because everything we're doing at the moment is working with a partner, which sometimes is good because it gives access to data, but sometimes it's bad because they have their own agenda. So if we were to get a couple of tenements that we could register in Altona's own name, then we could do things the way we wanted to do. Obviously, there's a time element to this as well because you have to start scratch. A lot of the work has been done. It costs time and money, maybe 6 months and £50,000 or something like that to get to that point to get an exploration license granted to you. But I think that we have the right people on the board and the right network in Africa at the moment to achieve that. So I think from a shareholder point of view, we're not sitting back in our laurels because we've got these 3 projects which may or may not turn into assets. We are keep pushing forward and forward and forward, and we're trying alternative. I think you just, obviously you learn as you go forward, don't you? And what I knew when I was basically on my own last June, it's completely different now.
You've got a team behind you now. There's a team in place. There's structures in place. I think you've got companies set up in each of the African countries as well to assist. So life's a lot easier.
It's true. That's one of the first lessons we learned. I was drafting contracts when we first started because we had no cash, we had no lawyer, we had no advisor. So I was drafting my own contract thinking, this looks all right. Of course, people scratching their head going, really? So now we have local law firms in each of the countries that we're working in. We're forming subsidiaries in each of the countries that we're looking to work in. We've got a great law firm on board advising us who are absolutely superb. Lots of experience in both listing companies on standard, but also, specializing in the resources sector and focusing on Africa as well. So I think everything that can be done is being done. It's just time. And I would say we are 3 months behind. I would have expected to have an asset by now, and I have expected to be on the LSE by now. And I'm annoyed that we're not, but there literally was nothing we could do to speed this up. I suppose if we'd have had £1 million in the bank last June, then we could have moved things forward quicker, but we didn't. We only did our first fundraise, which was quite small, in December last year. So I guess I'm a roundabout way. I'm apologising to shareholders. I'm sorry we're slightly behind schedule, but sit tight, and we will. I think once we get the first asset, we will start moving fast because what we have been spending our time doing is putting everything in place.
It's like a domino effect. If the listing comes and then when an asset comes and news flow will be aplenty. So no, I'm looking forward to it. I must admit, I do have some Altona shares myself. So I just look at the peers and the main market. You talked about them earlier on, Pinsana and Macango. I mean, I think Pinsana at one point was like £120 million market cap at one point.
Isn't it around 200 now? There's also Rainbow.
Rainbow Rare. Yeah,
are the early guys. They're actually producing rare earths. They're actually mining it at the moment. So it's there again. They're sort of probably 4 or 5 years ahead of us. But I think from a point of view, as everyone knows who's ever invested in a resources company from the start, it's not about share price isn't going to move until we we announced the first sale of our first rare earths. Every time we announce something, every new development, every resource estimate we put out, every acquisition, every maybe influential new board member or director joins the company, it's going to affect the ultimate, success, profitability of the company. So the share price should go up in increments. What I don't want to do is start being over enthusiastic with the news, cause a spike in the share price, which then leads to a decline, because that's an absolute no-no. That really annoys people.
Yeah.
One thing I can take from 20 years in financial PR, it's don't do that. It's the thing that annoys shareholders more than anything. Some people have been telling me that we're a bit light on news, but we're light on news because we're working on it, and I'm not prepared to pop out trading updates left, right, and centre to appease shareholders. And I know it's you could say it's not best practice, but at the same time, there is a reverse thought that it actually is best practice. When we have news, we will announce it ASAP. I've got half a dozen press releases in draft form on my desktop, ready to send out, and we just have to get the job done first of all.
Definitely. Mark, sorry, I've been talking to Christian for too much for the last half hour. I maybe let you butt in.
No, it's fine. It's good. I enjoyed listening, and I like what you said there, Christian. Almost apologising to shareholders, but things are about to change and get sort of quite active. I'm looking forward myself to seeing how that develops. The only thing I sort of picked up on wanting to ask you about was you said earlier on that you're not, you don't know a whole lot about rare earths, but your background in finance is obviously very clear. Is it fair to say that you might be focusing then more on the running of the business from that point of view? And what will you build? Will you build a team that have the perhaps the required knowledge in the rare earth space?
Yes, absolutely. Yes and no, I suppose. It's only product knowledge. If you take on a new client, as I've done many, many times, then you need to know their business as well as they do. So I've spent now the last 12 months learning as much as I can about rare earths. I've been on LSE discussion panels, and I've been on this forum and this forum. And of course, to go onto it, to go onto one of these things with very little knowledge is quite difficult. I'm not a geologist, and most of the people that I meet on these discussion panels are geologists, and it's quite embarrassing. My lack of detailed knowledge that would be needed to be reported to let's say an analyst, a sector analyst. But I'm not at this stage of our development. I'm not reporting to someone who needs that level of information. Plus, we have our wonderful Cedric Simonet, who's based in Africa, who's been a geologist in Africa for 25 years, run his own businesses. He is the guy I turn to. I was talking to him this morning. And we had that conversation because we're sort of gearing up to start work on Monte Moamba. I said to him, look, you're going to have lots of really stupid questions from me because I've never started an exploration program on a mining company before. I've always been, the company's done that, and then they'll tell me, hey, Christian, we just signed this, can we report it? So I'll report it obviously in probably favourable terms, as a financial PR person does. The nomad would obviously chop all the dross out. And that's what we would do. So I've never really been aware of what's gone on behind the curtain. But that's what I'm learning. So we have multiple contracts. So I said, you do this one, I'll watch what you're doing, ask silly questions, but then will you let me do the next one? Will you let me put together the process, the teams, the people, the machinery, all the permits, the environmentals, everything else? Will you let me do that? Obviously stand behind my shoulder and watch me do it so I understand how to do it. I'll jump on a plane and fly out there once they're off the red list in some of these countries. But yes, if we didn't have Cedric, I think we'll be a lot lesser than we are. But I guess my forte is advising companies in cities, running companies in cities. The city works, what's good, what's bad, corporate governance. And we are in the process of getting our website up and running, which was sort of planned to coincide with the LSE listing. But we're going to move that date up. So hopefully a lovely, shiny, informative website, which will, do the company justice, because our current web built, I think, about 15 years ago, and no money's been spent on it since. So I said, I'm looking after the, I suppose, traditional CEO role. I noticed I said CEO, not chief exec then, sorry. And Cedric is doing more of a COO role. And between the two of us, we're the two execs, or we will be the two execs in the company. And I think at this time they're the best pair of hands, even though I'm saying, I'm talking about 50% of it. We're the best pair of hands to do this.
Good, excellent.
I think also just about that, we're not. Well, I'm certainly not cynical. I've not been in the mining world for 20 years. I've not worked in the mine, and I've not seen many projects come and go. So I don't have that sort of wary fatalism that some mining executives may have, because they've been there and done that and it's failed. But they also, at the same time, they know all the tricks, so they might be trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. That's not us. I know that doesn't work. Everything we do is well thought out and planned. Every message we release, hopefully, is clear and concise and sort of accurate, reflects what the company's doing at this time. And I think the valuation is still a bit wishy-washy. I know that we've issued a large number of shares, so the valuation of the company, as I said, around whatever it is, £1.82 million, is probably due to the number of shares and issues. But I am glad the share price moved from 6.5p up to about 10.5, 11p, where it is now, to show that we have had some sort of input of excitement, shall we call it. I think if we'd just issued shares and the share price was 6.5p, we wouldn't have been doing our job. We just, artificially inflated the valuation of the company. So we haven't done that. But this is all before we have an asset. So I think once we can start mining, actually doing a proper mining role, which Altona has never done. Well, certainly not for 12 years. And I think that would be great. I think to add another company to the competitive landscape for rare earths in the UK, I think it's good for the UK. I think it's good for the stock market. And I think it's good for fans of the rare earth sector who hopefully are confident, or are certainly pleased with themselves, that they've got on this this bandwagon before the rest of the general market has.
Great, good. Well, as I say, I look forward to seeing the developments as and when they come out. But yeah, listen, it's been very nice talking to you today, Christian. Thank you very much for your time. Unless Kenny have any final thoughts.
Should we spend half an hour now talking about my personal life, my interests and hobbies?
We can save that for another podcast if you want, Christian.
No, not today.
Yeah, no worries. No, it's been great having you on, and I appreciate the time, and we look forward to seeing how the story unfolds. And obviously, myself, I'm aligned as a shareholder, so look forward to it. Excellent.
Thanks, chaps. Thanks for letting me waffle on.
We'll let you go anyway. We'll catch you later.
Thank you, Christian.
Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to another podcast from Market Musings with Ben and Russell. Tune in next time.